Notebook on Cities and Culture's Korea Tour is brought to you by Daniel Murphy, David Hayes, and Polar Inertia Journal, an outlet for artists and researchers documenting the urban condition at polarinertia.com. Before coming to Korea, I'd studied Korean language and culture for years. I knew things about Korea, and I knew about the plastic surgery, but then I found myself staying in Apgujeong, walking down the plastic surgery mile the first morning, not going into the first 4 coffee shops I found because they would have required me to go into a plastic surgery clinic to get to them, and realizing I knew nothing about the plastic surgery here in Korea. But tell me, it's come up in conversation so many times so far, just in life in Korea. What do foreigners find so unsavory about the plastic surgery, Westerners particularly?
Plastic surgery. I think coming to Korea is for most people that we're talking about, most expats are quite young, early 20s, etc. And probably most of them have never had any real experience with hospitals, let alone cosmetic surgery before. And suddenly they're walking down the streets, you see the ads, and by coincidence, as we're recording this, something going around on Facebook and so on is a Be White ad. It's actually for makeup, but it's for makeup. And related, a lot of the expats here, that's majority, are English teachers, and they are specifically chosen because they come from an Anglo-Saxon country. And some of them may have had trouble securing a job because they're black or not Caucasian. So already just coming into Korea, just even before you get here, even if you haven't done any research on the internet, you're probably going to be aware very quickly about the certain stereotypes, certain themes about race and whiteness and so on in Korea. And then the cosmetic surgery. And a lot of the cosmetic surgery is, when you hear about all the huge number of procedures done, there's been this Economist graph, which has been going around for, I think, a year, maybe 2 years, which shows that Korea has the highest per capita operations in the world. A lot of people make certain assumptions about that. Those, what kind of procedures are going on. We could talk more about that later, but what isn't mentioned is that most of them are just for double eyelids. I've forgotten the correct the medical term escapes me.
Right. I've never even heard the medical term for that, but I hear them talk about the surgery a lot.
I don't know. Double eyelids are associated with Caucasians. There's a lot of in academic articles. A lot of people say that, not just academics, that double eyelids aren't a Caucasian thing, aren't a European thing, that many Koreans naturally have double eyelids, and that is quite true, possibly, because this figure of 50% of Koreans having it is thrown around regularly, sometimes even higher than that, but even academics will never provide a source of that figure. I'm very happy to believe it, but no one ever provides any evidence of that. But, be that as it may, double eyelids are associated with Caucasians. I've done a lot of research on a number of different races in ads. There's a disproportionate number of Caucasians. It's very easy when you first come to Korea to believe that all of this is as that ad we got, this ad that's being talked about as we speak, the Be White. It's very easy to believe that it's all about wanting to look Caucasian, which completely isn't true, but it's very easy to believe that at first.
And it's here in Busan, South Korea, which I've seen advertise itself as a capital of medical tourism as well, that I'm speaking on Notebook on Cities and Culture with James Turnbull. He's the author of a blog called The Grand Narrative on Korean feminism, sexuality, and popular culture. This is one of the many subjects that comes up on The Grand Narrative, and it's never far from, when the conversations I've got into here in Korea, or the conversations that I'm reduced to being a passive listener in, they often touch on topics that I've read you write about. For example, the double eyelids. And I've had to emphasize many times to Koreans I've met here, my girlfriend's cousins, things like that, they'll ask me, what do you think of this girl or this girl or this girl? Or do you think she'd be pretty even without double eyelids? And I have to explain to them, I don't care about double eyelids. None of us do. Like us, I'm speaking for every foreigner, of course, so it's broad strokes, but how much of an exaggeration is it to say that none of us care about, as much as Koreans do, about the whole double eyelid? I don't even really know that I'm not fully sure what a double eyelid looks like versus a not. You know what I mean? It's like you get lost quickly in this. You've been here a long time in Korea, but we don't care that much, right?
I don't think it's an exaggeration at all. I also don't care.
So why do they care?
Another common theme in discussions about cosmetic surgery and East Asia is that positive associations with double eyelids. And well, let me just jump ahead in a way. I'm remembering now. The theme is, a common thing said, it doesn't matter how little the author knows about Korea or is an expert on Korea, is that Koreans have Western, quotation marks, Western beauty ideals. And even the most knowledgeable commentator who is well aware that if you put that notion to Korean cosmetic surgery patients, or Koreans in general, they would be quite offended by the notion that they want to look Western. Even they would perpetuate that just common refrain about Korea. So I didn't understand it. Like I said, I used to be one of those guys who, understandably, because of what I saw, the ads, the way things were talked about, that Koreans wanted to look white, I used to be that person. Then I spoke to actual Koreans, and put me in my place, quite rightly. But still, despite that, every time Koreans have Western beauty ideals. What is it? Why? Why do authors, especially foreign-based authors about Korea, keep saying this? Then I discovered this quite old book, article about Korean Americans in the U.S. Well, naturally in the U.S. It was Bay Area cosmetic surgery patients, and the author was investigating why they wanted to get cosmetic surgery and so on, and with the caveats that what applies to Bay Area patients, Korean American patients in the U.S. does not apply to Koreans necessarily.
It's a hard sample to generalize from, true.
Yeah. But that aside, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, it actually really is applicable if you look at the results, frankly. Long story short, the way certain bodily features are discussed about, the stereotypes that come with them, make certain features, namely double eyelids, which are more associated with Caucasians than other races. They have much more positive connotations they have positive connotations. Monolids look sleepy, for example, and your cosmetic surgeon will say that and encourage you to get double eyelids as a result. And the patients themselves will say monolids, square faces or whatever, instead of an angular V-line face, with, that looks sleepy. And so the patients, not only would, the doctors, the surgeons would give this an air of scientific objectivity, whereas it's actually bullshit.
Guy in a white lab coat said it.
Yeah, exactly. It's just all, racial stereotypes. And the patients themselves would, incorporate this into their own views. So maybe, of course, they already had these views before they began. And so this is the way that a society can still have Western beauty ideals, despite the fact that every patient you talk to will vehemently reject the notion that they want to look white.
You mentioned a few other terms there that I was first mystified by when I saw them, but I of course read about later on your blog and elsewhere. There's the idea of the big face and the small face. I first couldn't mentally process the idea of face size, and then I realized sort of what they were talking about here. And then you mentioned the V line of the face. They talk about X lines and S lines. How many lines are there? How many types of alphabetical lines do they talk about?
So this is kind of this is kind of my thing, the alphabetization or body lines or whatever you want to call it. I could talk about it forever. Before I begin, one thing, it's not so much the labels themselves, it's the labeling, which is interesting. If you've never heard of alphabetization or Vline or whatever before, in English-speaking Western countries, I assume it's similar in other non-English-speaking Western countries, we have certain labels of female body shape, hourglass, banana, inverted triangle, newspaper, whatever. You might get a few names here, different names here and there, but generally there's about 4 or 5 different body shapes, which, in my experience, because of a woman I've talked to, I've obviously not talked to every Western woman, but the ones I have talked to tell me, they're generally aware of their body shape, and accordingly, there's so many so much fashion-related advice and articles and so on about how to dress to your body shape. It's actually quite interesting, and I'm sort of jealous in a way because, when guys dressing, we just, what shall I wear today? A suit, and especially a bald guy like me, I don't have to worry about my hair so much. Like if you have a pear-shaped body, then, you should wear like some frills on your shoulders to sort of emphasize those more, and your waist should be a bit higher so it looks like it's thinner. You look more like an hourglass. Sorry, all that aside, there's basically only about 4 or 5 body shapes, and people, magazines, newspapers sometimes invent more, but they're not taken very seriously. There's kind of like joke articles in the weekend edition of a newspaper, and these 4 or 5 body shapes have been around, part of a discourse in public and media, etc., about women's bodies. It's actually difficult to find really when people started talking about female body shapes in this way, but I would wager at least since the 50s. But all that said, before I go on, there's been one important exception recently, and that is the thigh gap.
Thigh gap, oh my.
I say that, newspapers, etc., will invent new body shapes of women, but it's just a joke. But since last year, especially the thigh gap, that is a genuine new body line for women. It's actually mostly teenage girls sort of doing this, sort of making this a thing of their own accord, which is quite surprising. But that is a Western invented body line, which is making a real impact on women in the States especially. So, sorry, all that said, that's the West. So it's very easy to say that, it's just like, when you hear about S lines or V lines or whatever, then it's just the same in Korea, because S line is like an hourglass on the side, and ostensibly it is. But starting about a decade ago, the media and companies started inventing body line after body line after body line. For example, the S line, which is the most popular and which everyone knows, it didn't exist 10 years ago. But that is one of the differences. An hourglass, people in the 1950s would know what an hourglass figure is, but an S line, the term didn't exist 10 years ago. It was called juk juk bang bang before that. I could explain, well, you don't. Okay, juk, so I forgive my pronunciation. Juk means sort of long, thin, deep. Bang bang means bread, so breasts and buttocks. So
I knew the words, but I needed to know how that broke down. I was
so that's I don't know who or which company or which newspaper invented that, but other lines, companies invented them And long story short, the aim is to get certain products associated with certain lines. So the Vline is one of the most successful ones. There's this, it doesn't translate well in English, corn silk tea drink, or 옥수수 수염차 in Korean, and somehow the company behind that, I've forgotten the company name, sorry, but they were successful in making people think if you drink this, you will get an angular jaw, V-line. So they really lucked out with that. Somehow they were successful with that. Successful with making a public think V-line tea drink.
And I have to imagine, if you ask actual Korean people, even who drink this tea, do you think this will actually get you that line? They'll probably be like, well, no, but maybe it'll have some benefits.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think it'll happen, but it's like, it can hurt. It's sort of yes, no, not really, but yes, it might sort of thing, what the hell, and so it doesn't sound very serious, but, sort of, well, I should pause for context, I guess. Korea is the only country in the OECD where women between 20 and 39 are getting thinner. Every demographic in the OECD, young men, Korean men, 20 to 39, Japanese men, Japanese woman, 20 to 39, UK, woman, man, US, etc. Everyone else
is getting more obese. And of course, Korea does also. It's more complicated than just one figure. Of course, some Koreans are also getting more obese. But be that as it may, Korea is the only country in the world, Korean women are the only demographic where they're getting thinner. From 8.2% in 97 to 13.7 or something like that, which might not sound like much, but again, it's the only country in the world where Korean women are getting where women are getting thinner, which says a lot. So this may sound all very harmless and so on, but it's actually having a real impact on how women and men, of course, view and alter their bodies. So that was a V-line, and because of a V-line, other companies want to replicate that success. So all of a sudden, and it's still going on, it's sort of, people say it's like this was a fad which has stopped. I would more argue that it's just become a regular part of popular accepted culture. Companies invent lines for you to, hoping that you will associate their product with their line. So the V-line is the angular face, but Venus lingerie company wants you to associate the line between a woman's cleavage, well, that line, as a V-line. But Yes Sir lingerie company, guess what letter they want you to associate that with? Y. But there's also other companies that want you, I think a Y line is, it's just bizarre. Like, there's a a vaginal cleanser company, which sells their vaginal cleanser in terms of a Y line, and it's a bit unclear. What is a Y line? A vagina? A crotch?
Let's just leave that open to interpretation.
Yeah. And again, it's not so much the labels themselves, it's a labeling. It's the fact that they would choose to sell these products in terms of the lines, or that is the most telling thing. And this all started very suddenly about a decade ago. And phone companies will sell you product. One company, it was Samsung, of course, yes, not many phone companies really. They sold a product on the flawed assumption that the side of a phone somehow resembled Yui, this singer's profile, and so on.
It might be like a fun fact, but why is it a selling point?
Exactly, and why do they choose to do this? So again, it's all harmless fun in a way, and it is. And sure, people don't take it seriously, but then they do. So,
yes and no to that. And it's the advertising you see this in, and advertising is a big subject you write about in the grand narrative, and it's something I've paid attention to since I came here. And I see a fair bit of Korean advertising in Koreatown and Los Angeles, even at home, but I don't know. I think about the contrast to Japan, And when Westerners go to Japan, and especially if they don't know any Japanese, they see Japanese ads and think that's so wacky, that's so bizarre. Just the strangeness is what they take away. Here in Korea, it seems like the ads are they're just really earnest. I mean, do you get that sense? There's a lack of irony that especially compared to the States, where the thorough irony has been a mainstay of advertising since the late 80s, I would think. But in the States, they still want you to buy things with their ads. And it's kind of like, yeah, it's bullshit, but come on, just drink some Pepsi. It's still the same end result. But here, I can't imagine that. Maybe it's because I don't pick up on cultural associations, or I know the language, but not thoroughly enough to get the implication. But do you think it's more earnest here?
Earnest.
Or unironic?
Well, irony... Korean's approach to irony is a bit of a minefield, I found, discussing it, because maybe I should talk about Korean ad culture first. And actually this is very similar to Japan. Background is that the Korean media is extensively heavily based on the Japanese media.
Right. Didn't NHK was the model for the one here, like that? Like NHK was the model for what's the national state? It's not SBS. It's KBS. Like KBS modeled themselves after NHK, for example.
Embarrassingly, I don't know. Sorry, but in a very general sense, it's Korea Inc. is actually considered almost a better model of Japan Inc. than Japan Inc. itself. Back when I was a history student in New Zealand, I researched a lot about developmental states and so on. The Keiretsu and Zaibatsu and Jaebol structure here, exactly the same. Of course, there's some important differences, but not very many. It's extremely similar. I don't mean to go on about the similarities, but there is just one specific one, and that is at the role of celebrity endorsements. Celebrity endorsements it's a very frustrating subject because there haven't been many studies of almost anywhere. Academic studies actually counting the number of ads with celebrities, and especially not in Northeast Asia. But a figure frequently thrown around is that 2/3 of Korean ads feature celebrity, and
so when I just think it's a random person, it's probably a well-known person.
Yeah. And that comes with so many caveats there, because it's something, I'm to blame for this. I throw that figure around because it is true, but is that TV commercials, is that newspaper ads, print ads, etc. There's actually quite significant differences between all those. So, but what the hell? We'll say 2/3 features a celebrity. Now the point is, that again with the caveat that there's very few good, reliable figures out there. It's like 10, 20, 30 maximum in again, quotation marks, Western countries. There's quite a big contrast.
We're used to seeing our own celebrities, endorse things in Japan. That's like a meme. Watch this Harrison Ford beer commercial in Japan. It's so weird. Watch this Jodie Foster yogurt. I don't know what she endorses in Japan, but we know it more from Japan than we know it from ourselves.
I think I first learned of that when I read Rising Sun by Michael Crichton many years ago. I'm surprised it still goes on with everything being because these ads, they used to have the stipulation that they could not be played outside of Japan.
They might have stopped. They're all old when I see them.
Now, of course, with them being so readily available, because it's so embarrassing that presumably the number of foreign celebrities doing that has gone down. But sorry, my point is that Korea and Japan share this this heavy reliance on celebrities. Korean advertisers don't like this. Bruce, I think his name is Bruce Kane, sorry, was, and I'm not sure if he still is, but he was the first foreign head of JL Communications, which was the biggest advertising agency in Korea. And he said he hated ads, celebrity endorsements, because it's basically just a famous person just pointing at a bottle.
Yeah.
There's no scope for creativity or anything like
To be
that.
fair, they could also hold the bottle.
Yes, they do hold and point it. I could give you many examples. And I've seen some lame ads where just lots of dancing, and then suddenly at the end the celebrity pops up and literally points at the bottle. One important reason for that is the structure of the music industry. I'll say long story short often, I'm sorry, but you may hear a lot of wonderful press about the growth of the digital music market in Korea. And it's true, it is very expanding rapidly, but what it often is not said, and an amazing glaring oversight, is that it's one track like 99 US cents in iTunes. It's more like 15 to 20 or even more in Korea. So how can any article about the music market in Korea neglect to point it out?
You're going to grow a market if you reduce the price that much of a product. Yes.
They deliberately kept so low so that Koreans won't turn to illegal downloading instead, which of course still goes on, and Koreans have quite even by, you illegally download, I illegally download, everyone listening illegally downloads, but be that as it may, despite that, Koreans have a bad reputation for that. I mention all that because there's been an explosion in boy bands and girl groups in the last decade, and they're all competing. They don't make much money from selling music anymore. So I think 60%, I think 40, I just saw the stats the other day, I'll be writing about it on my blog soon. I think 40% of entertainment management companies, music companies, their revenues come from music sales, not just in Korea, of course. And 60% come from sales of CDs to fans with all of the paraphernalia and so on, and commercial endorsements. So boy bands and girl groups are fighting for endorsements, and that explains partially explains why there's ever increasing provocative choreography, costumes, scandals, etc., etc. It's all to gain attention. It's called sexy concept in Korea, and they just there's a controversy and scandal about them every 3 months. But you don't have to be in Korea for very long for it to all found very, very, very samey. Things need to be ever increasingly provocative to get attention, to get noticed, and get those celebrity endorsements. And this is what I've been saying for many years. Unfortunately, the ratio of that 2/3 figure I said earlier, that was actually the same 15 years ago, before, I'm discovering recently, before all this explosion in girl groups and the need for commercial endorsements started. So I still certainly think that those imperatives still exist and still maintain that, but there is something much more fundamental to either the Japanese and Korean media industries or rather the culture, which is responsible if it happened 10 to 15 years ago as well. And by coincidence, I've just been working on this week, and one thing is Korea and Japan, they don't really have reality TV. I mean,
not like in the West, anyway.
Yeah. Fortunately, I went in university in New Zealand. Unfortunately, I left just before, in 2000. I left just before the Big Brother sort of thing started here. That is there's nothing in Korea like that.
Right, no Korean Big Brother.
No. There is. more recently, there have been sort of reality programs. Like there's this one following people in the military and foreigners in the military. Although it's very, of course, very scripted, really. But it's nothing compared to Big Brother or anything like that. So that absence, I think, partially explains the appeal of celebrities. Also,
I was going to say, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I was thinking, what have I seen that's like reality TV in Korea? Recently, there was a program on the toddlers of celebrities. So it was really about celebrities. But
my children are much cuter.
It's funny you mentioned that, because the conversation around me in the room I was in, like many conversations I've heard in Korea, turned immediately to physical attractiveness, and specifically of the toddlers on the show. And no one in America is going to believe me when I say this. Someone said, yes, that baby would be prettier if she lost weight. I was like,
oh my God.
Yeah. But I take it doesn't surprise you to hear that as much as it surprises me.
I feel like a bit of a fraud, sorry, because I don't watch much Korean TV precisely because of what you just mentioned. Not so much an explanation, but an observation related to this, why so many celebrities and ads and so on, is, commercials are called CFs here, commercial films. And when I first started, seriously analyzing them and so on, I was really taken aback because there'd been making of CFs. There's this, I'm not sure if it's actually a law or, sort of working, just sort of modus operandi in the industry, but commercials tend to be 15 seconds long at most. There'll be 15 seconds of versions on TV and 30-second versions online. But online, there'll be making of commercials. And I just didn't understand because, they will sell me some message. If I drink this, I will have sex with lots of women and so on. But then
it would be a joke in the it would be in an ad maybe in the West, but it would be as a joke. You'll have sex with all the girls if you drink this. Drink it anyway.
A joke. I mean, of course we're all aware that we won't, but
so is the ad. But it's still just drink it.
But subtly we might sort of
yes.
As an aside, I lecture about ads sometimes, and I say that at the end of the presentation, a lecture, I say, we are all very knowledgeable now. You will not be fooled by these, etc., etc. But that's bullshit. I'm affected by ads. Everyone's affected by ads. We see about 1,000 commercial messages in developed countries a day.
Things we see affect us, ad or otherwise. That's how you can't get out of that.
Aware of it, yeah. So, of course, they affect us. So I didn't understand, why would they break the illusion? Because getting that illusion across and having it influence me explicitly or implicitly is, very important. Why would they think to break that? And it's a bit like reality TV. It's a bit like all of those shows showing the, in the States, Western countries showing the celebrities live. It's a way of getting more intimately familiar with the celebrity. And related, I saw this wonderful docu-movie called Star Suckers. Have you heard of it? No. I recommend it, highly recommend it if you can. It's about celebrity, mostly. The purpose, I learned from it, of these making of CFs is to make us much more familiar, make us feel much more familiar and similar with and similar to the celebrities. A great example to show you how important this is. It's a small segment in the documentary. I think it was American high school. It was Russian history students. Half of the class, the exam question was right about Rasputin. But unbeknown to the students, half of them, their exam papers had been individually altered, so that Rasputin's birthday was given the same day as theirs. They weren't aware of it. So my birthday is March 8th. It would say March 8th, 1807, whatever. And half of the class were just given his normal birth date, his real birth date, rather. And for half of the class who thought that his birthday was the same as theirs, they gave much more positive assessments of a student in their history class. And this really hit home to me at the time because I just joined Facebook then. And back then I just friended everyone. And maybe entirely too frankly, if it was a young woman and if she was hot, then I couldn't Facebook friend her fast enough. And, most of them would Facebook friend back. That's what Facebook is like. Now, of course, I do not care how many friends I have. But I noticed one day, like I said, my birthday's in March, and I had, this is too frank, what the hell, I had a choice between 3 hot young women to Facebook friend. And they were equally attractive, but...
Could you only friend one of them?
No. I found myself drawn to one of them above the others, and only because I'd seen this, seen Sasaka, so I realized I was drawn to her because her birthday was in March. And then looking over and going back, I realized a disproportionate number of my Facebook so-called friends were born in March. So it may sound like nothing, but just a smidgen of implied familiarity and similar, he or she is like me feelings with a celebrity has a real impact on our behavior. And Korean television is saturated with these. They're not explicit reality TV programs, not like we'd think Big Brother and so on, but Korean TV without these, there wouldn't be much left, frankly. These behind the scenes. There is no, like I said, no keeping the facade of, keeping the illusion. No perceived need to maintain that. But it has, for instance, like Lee Hyori, she was probably the biggest sex symbol in Korea for about 5, and she's still pretty well. No, she's too old now. She's 35. Oh my God! But she was the biggest sex symbol in Korea for a long time. But part of her appeal was, one day you'd see her doing a typical sexy ad or whatever, or sexy dance. The next day you'd see her covered in mud in some sort of reality TV program, which I've since discovered later. I've been naive too, and I'm probably still naive in many respects. Extremely scripted. But be that as it may, she came across as very down to earth and so on. And it's difficult. It's not every celebrity can pull it off, and I know I've talked about this with Koreans. Many of them agree with me that Lee Hyori is one of the ones who really pulled off being superstar and up in the face in mud and so, that is really a real interesting thing about Korea. I hope your listeners think that's interesting.
Yeah, there's something that ties in here with what seems to me to be true about Korean culture, in that we all in all cultures look for common ground with people, no matter how superficial. But in Korea, it's made more explicit. Like, you happen to go to the same school, well, then you're going to do that person favors, probably, And there's not a sense of I said no matter how meaningless, but I think maybe to Korean people there is no meaningless common ground. It's all worth something, right?
I would frame it differently. The reason, for example, Sky. You heard of Sky?
The 3 universities that are the ones you go to, and if you don't get into them, you'll fail in life forever, right? That's how it works, right?
It's not the quality of the teaching by any means. It's the network you establish there, which will set you up for the rest of your life. I've been here so long that I sometimes forget how much being here has changed me and how different Western countries are, because the vast majority of Koreans, with foreigners, Koreans approaching foreigners is quite different. But Koreans to Koreans do not talk to strangers. We don't just notice a book and say, hey, I've read that book too, etc.
The reaction is just, you don't want to get that reaction.
Yeah, it's, there'll be a lot of pseudo culturalist or scientific explanations of this because they don't know who you are, where they can. There's this Culture Shock Korea book, which is still available in many bookstores, and it was very enlightening and helpful when you first come to Korea. But then once you've been here a while and learning why this book is such bullshit is a very important part of integrating into Korea. And
I never opened that book. I know the cover, and the cover itself was off-putting enough to not open it.
So I may be in that book. I think it is in that book. One thing is, I'm being unfair maybe. A lot of them have a kernel of truth, if you talk to them out of blue on the subway, they don't know where to put you on their hierarchy, their network, which network to put you in. Is he or she a nopin saram, so a superior, or donggap, or same, etc. So just flummox what to do. But if you're in a specific setting, like a church or workplace or whatever, and you know exactly where to place them, then with where the place them comes across with a whole host of ways to interact, and they will readily interact and meet with you and talk to you and so on then. As such, that's actually kind of a worry. As a parent, because I have two I've got two daughters, 8 and 6. And there are many, many positives about living in Korea for children. But I do not want them to be here by the time they're 13 because because of the way hierarchy is so pervasive a part of life here and enshrined in the language and becomes second nature. And I don't want my children to learn that. One thing which brought that home to me was I started teaching at the university for the first time back in 2010. And before that, I'd read that young Koreans and sorry, another side. Generation is a big mark of identity in Korea. Partially because of what I'm explaining now, but partially just because Korea develops so quickly. That's why it's so interesting. The changes just in the time I've been here. Great.
And the generational differences are observably stark, even to people who don't know Korea at all.
And quite literally, because children might be a foot taller than their parents. I read, and I readily believed it, that young Koreans did not have any time for all that bullshit about if you're older than me, I use noppenmal with you, and that's one reason they like speaking in English, because there's not much less of that. We still have it subtly, of course. But when I came to start working at university, I mostly taught children before that, and it was not true. Young Korean students, they will be using noppenmal and youngaseo, etc. to people just 6 months older. And I can't stand that.
That's quickly finding out how old everybody is so they know which one to use.
Yeah. And I don't want my children thinking that that's... I do not... I hate to complain about Korea, just another expat complaining about Korea. But I've been here a long time. There's some things I'm allowed to dislike, and I obviously clearly do like the place. Things I'm married to, one of the locals, and are still here. But this is one thing I really do not like about Korea.
The hierarchical culture.
And the language is one of the major ways. And of course, going hand in hand with Confucianism is one of the major ways in which it's learned. And I do not want my children to learn that old men are naturally superior to you, and
any old man,
and deserve more respect than you just by existing. That is, and I say all these, and it may sound like I'm slamming Korea, but then but yeah, how can I? Of course, I'm not applying this across the board because my wife. It's being in Korea a long time, especially there's a common complaint about long-term expats, males writing about Korea. They say I've been in Korea. They are accused of saying I've been in Korea a long time, I'm married to a Korean, so I am not racist, I'm not, etc., etc.
That becomes a lightning, not a lightning rod, but a shield in any case.
Yeah, it's good to be reminded. Well, I could bore your listeners with the ways I'm talked about online, and
don't read that stuff.
Yeah, and I won't. I've learned to. I do think I really try hard. Actually, I've never said I've been here a long time. I'm married to a Korean woman, so I know everything about Korea. I've never, ever, ever said that. And in fact, being married to a Korean, you don't have to just be married. Just having Korean friends and so on. It's a reminder that, if you're an expat in Korea, or anywhere, it doesn't matter how long you've been in the country. You just need to rant sometimes. But Michael Breen, who wrote The Koreans a long time ago,
he's been on this show.
His book is a little dated now, but there's one line in it which really resonated with me, and that is that you have a bad day it's something like this. You have a bad day in Korea, you hate Koreans, etc., etc. Then you go home to your spouse, who means more to you than life itself. So, so every time I try to generalize about Koreans or say something extremely negative, and it sounds like I'm just being raining down hard on the place, then, there's my wife, and of course, it's like a check to stop yourself doing that kind of thing.
Right. And I see what you mean. By the way, Michael's working on a new edition of The Korean, so it'll be refreshed. But that line's probably still going to be in there. That hasn't changed about Korea.
Because I think it will help a lot of new expats and help to understand their feelings about the place. Because Korea really does make you mad. You hate it one day, you love it the next.
Right. You say you'd rather your daughters not be here by the time they get to 13, and say they do go somewhere else, say they're in the UK or New Zealand or anywhere. When could they safely return, sort of fortified against the parts of Korean culture you'd want them not to be subject to, but also able to enjoy the parts of Korean culture that you think they can benefit from?
They were born here, and ideally we'd go to the UK because there's no jobs in Australia and New Zealand.
Right. Hardly any people in New Zealand. I like that country a lot, but it needs some more population.
Me too. But it's only 4.2 million people. That's only 500,000 more than Busan. It's a great place to live if you can afford to. Rather, if you can make a living there. So the plan is we'll go to the UK, me doing God knows what, honestly, and it's creeping up faster than I'd like. 5 years I've got left. We'll go when my eldest daughter's 13. And of course when they're 18, they can do what they like. But I think especially being a teenager...
Not the age to be here.
Yeah, because... I'm a big procrastinator, and I just sailed through school. But I like to think I'm smart. So I was never really challenged for just not... I was very lazy at school. And that's haunted me ever since. I'm not a very diligent person. Sorry, I'm saying too much. My 8-year-old daughter, she has lots of homework. She's up until 9, 10 sometimes doing homework. I didn't have any homework at that age.
You weren't going to Hagwon either.
Hagwons, I didn't go to Hagwons either. Hagwons don't deserve the bad reputation they have necessarily. One reason is because they cover things not covered in classes. I mean, that's kind of a self-perpetuating cycle because teachers at school will assume this part of the syllabus everyone studied in a Hagwon, so we won't do it.
That's reinforcing the kids be out till midnight studying, then eat some tteokbokki, go home and start over again at 4 a.m.
But Hagwons are childcare, and mine are. One thing not mentioned, again, there's so much written about Korea where so many important things not mentioned is that, in this case, about Korea's M curve, about Korea's female workforce participation rate being so low, about Korean women leaving a workforce when they get married or have children. One thing not mentioned, not that childcare is just a man's job by any means, is that schools fit. When my eldest daughter, started school, she finished at 12:30, and I think she finishes at 1:30 now. And if we didn't have a piano hagwon teacher picking her and other kids up in her car, driving them to the hagwon, and then being picked up by an art hagwon teacher, that in the afternoons, I don't know what we would do for childcare, because they finish so early. Having said that, she likes both of her hagwons, especially the piano one. I would never send her the one that she really hated. And I am adamantly against sending children to them late at night. I used to work in one of the most notorious. I won't say the name because of Korea's wonderful libel laws. Draconian libel laws. But I would work there like 5:30 to 9, and I'd just be exhausted at 9 o'clock. At 9 o'clock, the 13-year-olds I was teaching in, 11-year-olds still had an hour to go, and the 13-year-olds were coming into class as I was leaving. I was exhausted, and they were coming into class then. And the high school students, the eldest, the 18, 19-year-olds, they would finish about 12:30. And that is later than most hagwons, but not much later. And I do think that is child abuse. I do think that children getting 5 hours or even less a night. I mean, there's a saying in some schools, 5 hours you fail, 4 hours you'll go to Seoul National. I do think that is child abuse, and no claims about imposing my Western value system or Eurocentrism or there's no culturally relativist defense against that. That is child abuse, pure and simple.
And in the name of, if it's an English hagwon, often in the name of doing well on a test, not really speaking English, ultimately, it's that the English hagwon that system gets the most criticism of them all, right? It's not the piano hagwon people are bothered about.
Criticism from whom, sorry?
Criticism mostly from Westerners. I think, I'm sure you know Daniel Tudor, of him. So he's actually written this, so I don't think he's written it in his newer book. He says he gets offers regularly to start an English hagwon. A partner will say, I'll put up all the capital, just join me in a hagwon. And he won't do it just because he writes, I can't be part of that system where it's kids being out until midnight, doing nothing but, I think I'm paraphrasing here, just sort of meaninglessly competing with one another, not to the ultimate benefit of them or the outside world or anybody. It's sort of burning so much energy in just purely internal Korean competition, right?
Yeah, that is certainly it. And English education in Korea, we could talk about it for hours, and it is a big joke, but it is, the bubble has burst. The Korean education departments are cutting all of their native speaker teacher programs, and it's much more difficult to get jobs here. My wife is a recruiter, actually. And Koreans are realizing, there is a reality that trillions of won have been spent on English education in the last 10 years, and Koreans are just as bad as they always were.
Little to show for it.
Yeah. And every English teacher, foreign English teacher in Korea, probably most of the Korean ones too, can tell you why. It's just a lot of Western expats, they come to Korea and then they've been here 2 months and they think they know everything wrong with the English education system, and it's like Korean education system, and if everyone just listened to me, then everything would be perfect. And the Korean education system is very Koreans aren't stupid. If it was so easy to change, then it would have been. But the two biggest problems, I guess, of English education in Korea is yes, Koreans were aware that they were just learning grammar and they needed natives, and there was a perception that Korean teachers, quite truthfully, to be frank, couldn't really teach conversation, and so they got native speakers to do that for them. But the native speakers weren't English teachers, like myself. I didn't have any English education, any teaching qualifications. There was just this, so there was the people being hired, and once they arrived here, then it was just we were expected to do the same thing, just teach the same way that has always happened in Korea. Especially the public schools where you meet the kids once a week for an hour or something with a co-teacher, and it's just, what's the point in having a native speaker there? There's that two things, yes. The fact that teachers weren't hired, and the fact that the people here were expected to do things the same old way. A lot of money thrown in it, but nothing actually changed. A lot of people, the Korean media scapegoats foreign teachers a lot for that, and especially with the claim that they're not qualified. But as I'm no Picasso, a blogger rightfully pointed out, because she was in this program, EPIC it's called, they are qualified. That certain requirements are given, qualifications are required for the job. The people coming met those. It's just that they were very low requirements. Have a degree, be from a native-speaking English country.
Requirements that Korea set low.
Yeah. So it's it's nothing to do with teachers. It's not their fault. And of course, there's been many dedicated teachers that have come.
It seems like these are similar systems, sort of the plastic surgery systems, shall we say, in the English education system. There's a lot of time and money being spent toward essentially toward a competition that doesn't exist outside of Korea necessarily. They seem to be perfect analogs. Do you think that's at all close to the truth?
I'm not really seeing, certainly competition within Korea, yes.
It's to no absolute benefit.
I understand now, yes. The English is all about TOEIC, getting the fabled 990. Regardless of your actual English ability, or, I say regardless, you do have to be pretty good at English to get 990, but regardless of your ability to genuinely interact in the language, it's just a proxy for your supposed competence in other areas. Cosmetic surgery,
Because the procedures done are, I don't know if we can call them in an absolute sense attractive, but they give you a certain look on the photo you're required to put on your resume, and that tells something. I'm beginning to sound like I'm describing that they're communicating in a secret code, but that gives you some kind of leg up on a job within Korea. It seems exactly the same to me. I'm not more attracted to a woman because she's had Korean-style plastic surgery. I'm probably less attracted, to be honest. I'm not saying I'm the arbiter of this, but it seems like it's all about achieving specific employment goals in Korea, and not. I don't know who's benefiting, I guess, is the question.
With cosmetic surgery in Korea, where before you, again, like I mentioned at the start of this podcast, you coming to Korea is often the first time people are really familiar, come across that, and there's a stuff for us to think about it, and the number of white people in ads, and the literal be white, and something I forgot to mention, is there's a disproportionate number of Caucasians in cosmetic surgery ads. So I really don't like people saying, those foolish expats who think everyone wants to look white. It's a very natural conclusion, and there are a few certain realities like Caucasians and cosmetic surgery ads, which are not just made up by people imposing their everyone wants to look white idea onto Korea. So it's the first time people have really forced to confront this issue and think about it, and most people are quite against it. I'm also not the arbiter, but often I look at before and after ads for cosmetic surgery, and I prefer before.
Sometimes it's clearly doctored to look worse, the before picture.
But I am much more sympathetic towards it now. I am aware of I write about regularly about the huge requirements, especially for women, in Korean workplaces. I am aware how it's definitely an investment both for yourself and your family. I mean, it's an investment in your career. And I don't bemoan anyone for doing it, and I can appreciate the confidence that comes with it. A bit of a funny story. I'm a fat, bald, middle-aged guy, but I shave my head every 2 days. I did it this morning. I hope you can tell. But if I leave it too long, I do not feel confident. So just something as simple as that, which no one really notices a difference, makes a huge difference.
You know you put the effort.
Yeah. Interesting, a sort of bit off topic, but interesting story. Especially with guys, if you feel sexy, you are sexy.
Confidence is always the quality talked about. Usually, rarely any other. You hear that first, like, fine, be in shape, fine, have money, but it's the confidence you get from those things. It's not necessarily those things.
The thing which made me realize this was an experiment where men were told this new deodorant had scientifically formulated pheromones, etc., to make you appealing to the opposite sex. The guys put it on and then got dressed. But unbeknownst, I don't know the exact circumstances of it. I write about this in my blog again. All the links, I mean. But I don't know the exact circumstances, but basically, unbeknownst to them, they were shown, there were two-way mirrors, and women were watching them getting dressed, and the women who were watching the guys getting dressed, who were told they were wearing this scientifically formulated, deodorant, they rated them much more sexy than the ones who weren't wearing one. And this was, obviously weren't smelling them, and these guys they had no idea they were being watched. It was just their demeanor. Just their demeanor, just them thinking they were sexy made them sexy. This may apply to women as well. Again, this is just one thing, and maybe I'm making too much of it. But the moral of that is I can really appreciate how much more confident just the little things can do. And so, again, I completely understand why people do it, how much confidence it can bring, why it's an investment, but the fact that it's a requirement at all, the fact that it is advertised to teenagers, there are specials where teenagers get it cheaply. Explicit ads.
These are the ads that make me wish I didn't understand Korean. When I see these ads on the when you read the surgery ads, it makes it that much worse when you can read them, right?
And like sitting in Starbucks like we are, I haven't been listening right now, but often the more Korean you find, the more women are just talking about their hair.
Yes.
That sounds just like a white, bald, fat, middle-aged guy talking. But Minji Kim, a body image activist, I interviewed myself recently. She noticed that. She also said she's noticed people doing it less and less these days, which is good.
Silver lining, I guess.
Yeah. Sorry, what were we saying?
Well, it brings me to something, talking about the way people act, talking about teenagers here, talking about the language. It brings me to a subject that you're the man to ask about, I think, because it's always kind of confused me. In many Korean classes I've had, or Korean language videos, or podcasts, or other learning materials, they'll have a unit on this concept of 예쁜 쪽. And they bring out the sort of wider linguistic uses of that form. But essentially, 예쁜척, pretending to be pretty is what they always. Teachers always translated this pretending to be pretty. No one ever understands that because the words don't seem to go together. From what I can tell, the Western mind, it's like, what do you mean pretending? Like you're pretty, or you are. You are, or you aren't. What is the story with 예쁜척? Why is that a concept here that seems so well known?
I'm sorry, it's the first I've heard of it.
Really?
Yeah.
It's the first you've heard of 예쁜척.
Yeah.
You don't hang out with. If you let your daughters get to teenagehood in Korea, they'll talk about it. But I've asked people about it. No one can ever explain. But it seems to get at a divide here in the way Koreans and foreigners think about appearance. Like here,
it sounds intriguing.
Yeah. You can pretend to be pretty here, whereas I feel like I don't speak for all foreigners, but that's either a quality you have or don't. If I talk about back in...
Yes, certainly, and I want to investigate it myself now. I'm sorry.
This is a blog post for the future of the grand narrative. The UK and the US, they get talked about as such superficial cultures. Coming from America, I always expect that I'm coming from the superficial place. And I wouldn't say that coming to Korea, I found myself in a more superficial place, but it's a place where the qualities we think of as superficial in America anyway, maybe in the UK as well, they're differently regarded here. I wouldn't call Korea more superficial, but how would you describe it? Not on that axis, but in those terms. America is supposed to be the superficial one, yes, but Korea plays the game of superficiality differently than the States does. Do you think so?
I think you've expressed it yourself very well. Yes, I'm sorry. I couldn't put it better. Sorry.
Oh, okay. It just plays the game differently.
Yes. I'm sorry. I don't know what to add. That's very good.
Well, I'm glad. It comes from reading your blog, which is The Grand Narrative, which covers Korean feminism, Korean sexuality, Korean popular culture, and more. I've been here in Busan speaking with James Turnbull, its author. James, thanks so much.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
This has been Notebook on Cities and Culture. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with the cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. And special thanks to all the backers of Notebook on Cities and Culture's Korea tour on Kickstarter. Adam Hartzell, Aidan Nullman, Alfred Lee, Andy Cooney, Angus Gordon, Bala Chenupati, Cam Smith, Chin Music Press, Dan Caraselli, Danny, Deborah Smith, Emmett Farragher, Umberto Grant, Ian Plosker, Ismail Kennedy, Jackie Gast, Jay Chang, Jeffrey Davis, James DeVito, Jonathan Filbert, Josh Paget, Kimberly Hahn, Manvir, Mark Hines, Matthew Workman, Maureen Kincaid Speller, Monica Eck, Michael Fransky, MJ Pritchett, Patrick O'Flaherty, Patrick Park, Piers Rippey, Robert Salzberg, Samuel Hansen, Sean Brown, Themistocles Crucis, Thomas Unterberger, Timothy Dobbs, and Wayne Wright.